And perfect. Hi, Stacey.
Hello.
So great to have you here. So we're going to get started here in just a moment, and we're kind of letting people in.
Okay.
All right, so perfect. I think we can get going. So so welcome everyone to the Rewards Mastermind. I'm here with Stacey Morgan, and I'm going to introduce her in just a moment. But as we get started here, I just want to let you know exactly what the Mastermind is all about. And so we're a collection of leaders in the total reward space that come together for the purpose of elevating the practice, and so that we can create those workplaces where people can thrive and employers love, and where we really engage our customers. And so it's overall, I believe that people are behind all companies, that and rewards is what drives our success and getting those people. So so I'm your host today. My name is Sam Reeve. We usually have Howard join us as well, and he might be able to jump in here as we go along. But the main person that we want to highlight today is Stacey. And of course, Stacey is the Vice President of Compensation Surveys at Culpepper, and we're very fortunate to have her here and her expertise. And we're going to be talking about the Culpepper budget survey results today. Now, before we jump in there, just a few things to note on the platform that we're on today. So we are broadcasting from Zoom, and so if you happen to be on the Zoom platform and you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box below. If you're listening on we also multicast across the internet, and so we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, and YouTube. If you happen to be on one of those platforms, please feel free to also include your questions, and we'll get to those. Either we'll try to monitor through the conversation today, or we can get to back to those when once we're concluded here. All right. So to kick things off here, Stacey, I would just love to hear a little bit more about how you got into the practice of compensation, and finally with Culpepper and developing these budget surveys.
So I started out as a recruiter a million years ago, and then got my master's in training and development. So I came about it sort of in a roundabout way, like a lot of us do in compensation. It was the one area of comp of HR that I didn't really have. And then I got here and realized it's not really HR at all. It's a lot of numbers, and it's a lot of Excel and this and that, but it turns out I really loved it. So I've been at Culpepper now for 20 years, and just about every position we have, you know, minus our IT team, which they would argue they don't want me over there anyway. So, but from the, the survey side, the consulting side, the SBS surveys, the market surveys, writing jobs, you name it.
So when did you start on this, actually doing the survey piece and leading that effort?
So we have two survey products, right? We've got our market data, and we're a participant-only survey. We update our data sets monthly on that. We're global, and we have that product. Then the salary budget survey is something we've been doing since, I think, before I was here. I mean, it's been a long time in some iteration or another. And it's just sort of evolved as the market has shifted and evolved. And now we run this 2 times a year. You don't have to be a Culpepper subscriber. You can get the results for free if you participate. Or you can purchase them after the fact once they're closed and published if you didn't get a chance to participate.
Yeah, one of the things I really enjoy about Culpepper is that the budget survey just provides so much value. And I think this year, more than any other, people were excited to see the results. I mean, there's just so much that has been going on this year, or in the past few years, right? That have taken time to actually work their way into the survey data. So let's just reflect on that. I mean, there was, of course, going through the pandemic, there was just a huge shock to the market. And then as we were emerging from that, there was the Great Resignation, where people were swapping jobs, and there was, the job market was extremely hot. And we were seeing some of the biggest increases in recent memory in a lot of positions. And then then there was the perception of inflation and how to deal with that. So the cool thing about the budget survey is it kind of brings all this together and shows the results, right?
Right. So from the survey, from the market survey product, right?
Mhm.
That's always going to lag what's going on in times of sort of volatility. I mean, it always is. We by law sort of have to keep it a little bit behind. And then we've got to take it in. We've got to clean it. The companies have to do their data submission. We keep it as fresh as possible. We update monthly, but there's always a lag. And it's always going to sort of reflect after the fact what's going on in the market. That has to happen first for us to be able to actually survey it. So it's nice to do these sort of more pulse surveys or sort of, hey, how are you guys handling this hot issue right now, right? COVID, inflation, turnover, remote work, all of these things that while we can ask in the main survey product, it doesn't have sort of the quickness, right? So I would say using market data and these types of things in conjunction is really helpful right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go through the survey and talk about some of the major trends that you were seeing overall and how they come out into the budget survey and the comp survey. But first, let's just focus on the budget survey. So to start off with, how should companies be thinking about using this information?
Well, like any other survey, I think you understand the questions and how they were asked. You look at the participants, which our participant list, I think 1,600 companies are participating in our current that just went live, our published results from August. I think you take a look at it and you kind of have to understand, who can answer what, who's answering them, what types of organizations are responding. So we even break out this many tech companies, this many life science companies, this many multinationals, this many are headquartered here and there. So kind of use all of that. And then we take it down to various cuts, technology companies by company size. So really make sure you're taking the data that applies to you and who you want to take a look at in terms of competing with for this information. And then do know the analytics we do on this are obviously extremely rigorous, but then as you complete it, also do your due diligence to make sure you're giving us the information that's accurate for your organization. And I understand sometimes that can be really difficult in large multinationals to know what's going on the ground in various locations.
Mm-hmm. And I know that the budget survey for Culpepper is updated. It's twice a year. Is that correct?
Right now, we always have sort of a look ahead, and then we have a final, right? So we just published we were open May through August for sort of what is your plan? What did you end up doing last year? What is your plan for this year? So there's always an actual and a proposed, and then we publish those in August. We'll do another one in the winter. Okay,
perfect. And so what are some of the trends that you saw in this year's survey?
I would say since COVID started, right? So we've hit COVID, remote work, tight labor market, economic instability and inflation, war. I mean, you name it, it's all sort of hitting, and people are asking us on every iteration to sort of add a few pulse questions at the top about what to do about certain things. Probably inflation. If we're wearing our inflation hat, I would say right now employees are having to dig pretty deep into their pockets to find some more money for folks. Mm-hmm. We're seeing increases, and I think I'll show this down the road. We keep a historical sort of table, 2.5 to 3% since the 2008-9 sort of collapse. And it was sort of you don't even need to do it. It's 2.5 or 3, like it's somewhere in between there, We're finally seeing that, the days of the 3% are pretty much gone, and we're actually seeing significant shifts in that, which we haven't seen for a long time, at least with our US hat on and sort of Western countries hat on.
Okay, so let's talk about that. I mean, so you mentioned we over the past, I don't know, as far as my memory on this, basically we've been seeing the budgets, and this is specifically for the merit piece of the budget of roughly around that 3% number. And then now this year we see an uptick. And so what's driving that uptick? I know that we can probably guess a lot of those pieces, but what are all the pieces that you think that are driving that uptick?
Well, COVID, first and foremost, I think the ability for people to work remotely opened up labor markets, and we're now competing in spaces that we weren't before.
Right.
So you're seeing small sort of second tier or mid-market cities now having to pay sort of the San Francisco rates, as you'd say, right? I think you're seeing just a tight labor market, especially in hot jobs, tech jobs, high demand kind of spaces where people are getting offers that are just insane. I'm not sure that's going to hold, but I think right now offers are going out that are crazy. And organizations that don't want to lose talent because the pipeline of talent is so low that they're willing to find the dollars for that, which leads to some of the other things with pay equity and compression that we can talk about. But and then I do think inflation and certain employee groups, for sure, I would say your hourly workers and things like that are feeling that in such a way that it's making it difficult for them to live week to week. So you've got these different employee groups right now that are struggling immensely, just, I would say, paycheck to paycheck. So that's requiring some employers to find some dollars there as well.
Okay. Another the big piece that you introduced in the survey this year was the impact of inflation and what companies are planning on doing due to the inflationary environment. And so what did you learn there?
Well, one is just, again, giving raises, finding more money for merit.
Yeah.
The proposed was about 0.5% less than what we saw on the actual on the last one. We're seeing this year, the next cycle also going up again, another 0.1%. So it's a moving target right now. I think what people's budgets are actually going to look like. I think we're seeing companies on the non-base pay side finding other things to do for their employees. I think if you have the chance to allow your employees to be remote, even if you've got a brick and mortar mentality leadership team, I think they're having to sort of be careful on that. Because that is a reward strategy right now, right? Sort of a tangible. We're seeing gas cards. We're seeing line items in pay for inflation bonuses. We're seeing a lot more variable stuff. So retention bonuses, stay bonuses. We're seeing sign-on stuff in jobs that normally didn't see a lot of sign-on. Trying to extricate it from base pay as much as you can if possible and give it in a one-time, hoping that this cools at some point and you haven't added this sort of permanent fixed situation to pay, knowing you'd obviously never take it back, right? Just sort of any tool in the toolkit people can find right now to try to hold on to talent or find talent.
So as inflation, I know as companies are dealing with there's a couple of drivers of this, and not just war in Ukraine and all the economic factors that go behind inflation, but a couple of things that are on the employee side is that in addition to some of those factors, we're also dealing with increases in minimum wage across a lot of different locations, a greater desire for companies to be paying closer towards the living wage, which is significantly different, as a lot of us comp practitioners have noticed. The minimum wage between the minimum wage and the living wages can be quite significant. And so as companies are trying to strive towards doing that, they're causing that compression, as you're talking about. Also, the impacts of inflation are impacting our lower paid workers to a greater extent, and so forth. So as leaders are looking at allocating their pay budgets for this next year, how should they taking more of a differentiated approach, or of how they allocate those funds, perhaps to some of the lower levels?
Right, and we don't ask the question lower level to higher level. We do ask based on performance, and we're seeing a bigger shift from what we're looking at to give a lower performer, an average performer, and a higher performer, right? So I think organizations are really having to bucket some employee groups from performance, from talent pipelines and high demand roles for your organization. And they are going to have to, I hate saying the 3% peanut butter, but the peanut butter approach is hasn't worked now for a while. It probably never really did, but it's definitely something right now. If you have some cost control or cost containment issues where you're like, listen, I've got a budget here, but how do I most wisely use it? It's definitely not to just spread it across. It's to be a little bit more strategic about how you're giving it. And I agree with you that that lower level employee right now, that's again, probably the ones also that can't be working remotely, right? They have to come to the office. A lot of times that's manufacturing and office staff or certain roles, call center, who knows? But it's lower level roles a lot of times are the ones that can't work remotely. So then now they have the gas and the eating lunch and this and that. So we know organizations are doing things right now to help with that kind of thing. So I think it's just sort of this perfect storm of a lot of things for that group of employees in particular.
Right. Well, we do have a question. Howard is asking, are companies consider treating employees who work from home differently than those in the office in regards to pay increases, and how should we think about budgets there?
That's sort of a living, breathing question as well. You know, the biggest one is if they're working in a labor market that has sort of different geographic influences around pay. So first and foremost, and mostly the people that are working at home are going to be your professional staff, right? Technical staff, those that don't have a lot of maybe customer facing, face-to-face kind of stuff. It's not your retail, your manufacturing. So right now, if you were in a labor market that was pretty tight, and your labor market is now anywhere that person can work. So you probably need to be very careful around doing anything that says, well, it's not very expensive to live in Lincoln, Nebraska, so we really don't need to pay what you're asking for. And they're saying, yeah, but I can stay in Lincoln and work for a company that's in New York, and they're willing to pay me New York wages, right? So you could argue that you get to work from home. That's a benefit. So that should be kind of part of the whole program here, and I should have to pay you less for that because you don't have a commuting cost and you don't have to go to the dry cleaner and you don't have to go out for lunch or what have you. But I think it's redefined what your talent pool is in a way that for the most part is making that a little more competitive.
Right. Okay. So back to a little bit on the inflation piece. And so we were talking about how, you know, the lower level workers are impacted greatly by inflation, and perhaps allocating some additional budget dollars down to or focusing towards those lower levels. So, but as we're experiencing in the market today, there's because we're focusing on those lower levels, it's causing compression. And compression is of course, for those our listeners out there, is that, you know, when we have those lower level roles are growing at a faster rate than higher level roles. And so we've seen that those support and those non-exempt and those level roles are growing quite quickly now, and is causing compression. So the pay is getting closer to their supervisors, their managers, and so forth, and it'll ripple through the entire structure. So I imagine that have you in the overall Culpepper pay survey, are you seeing that come through the results?
Well, I think we're seeing compression across for multiple issues. One is these areas where, yeah, the lowest pay rate that used to be okay is now bumped up. So that means the domino effect of that is the level above them needs to go up and the level above them needs to go up, right? So I think you're seeing some of it where it's employees that have already been there, but legislation or something else is pushing that lowest, your pay grade 1 up to your pay grade 2. And what does that look like now? And how do you again, what is the cost of making sure you're back in alignment on that? Secondly, I think you're seeing from a hiring perspective, and that's not just for hourly, that's for everybody. You're bringing people in right now, a software developer. You may have a software developer that's been there for 5 years making 100,000, and you're bringing someone in fresh out of college right now at 120 because that's what the market pressures are demanding. You're building in equity issues right there from step one. And what do you do about that when you're saying, I can't afford to bring everybody up to this hot market rate right now, but I've got to hire this talent. And they've got other offers on the plate, or I've got this guy here that just got a counter and I want him to stay. So I think it's the Wild West right now in terms of, and I think everybody's well aware that compression issues are being created.
Hmm.
You and I just came from Austin last week at the Pay Equity Conference, and I asked this specific question, and I'm not ever sure we got an answer because I'm not sure there is one other than here's the statistics you need to do to make sure you're paying equitably across groups. But what happens when current market pressures are forcing you to bring people in that are in essence already red circled in your pay bands because of what's going on in the market?
Yeah.
And no transparency on top of that. It's just going to be crazy. And I think I get weekly questions from clients. What do I do? This is what I need to hire this software developer at right now, but we pay $50,000 less than that. That's a midpoint of our grade in that job is $50,000 less than what's being thrown in front of me when we're negotiating salary.
Yeah, no doubt. And so so companies are really pressured to increase their internal rates that they're bringing on people in at the market rates.
Yeah.
Overall, in increasing the impact of cost on their and
And
inflation.
that can't be done overnight, right? There's no
Right.
way an organization could do that overnight, nor should they. And again, what happens if down the road the market cools and these rates cool a little bit, and now you've moved everybody up to this sort of stratosphere of pay? Which is why we're seeing, again, some of this where it's more on the variable side and some people trying to say, you know what, I can't offer you more base pay than this. It's just we've got these guardrails in place that I really can't do it if we want to stay sort of clean on our pay equity and our internal and not have, you'd be making more than the director of your team if I brought you in here. It's just going to cause a ripple effect that we can't have. But here's what I could do for you.
Yeah.
People are having to get a little more creative outside of base pay to try to staunch the bleeding a little bit, I guess, on that.
Right. So, but one thing that I want to dig into something you just mentioned. I mean, if the pay rates cool in the future. So if of course we're already seeing a slowdown in hiring for some positions and some of the crazy offers that were going on just 6 months ago are starting to normalize a bit. But when we look at the market data itself, do you find that there's situations where the pay data will actually increase in some situation or decrease in some situations from a year-over-year perspective and continue trending decreasing rate?
Yeah, we've opened up. So on the survey side, on our market data side, we have analysis and metrics that we use to sort of define outliers. But outliers are a living, breathing thing too, right? So
Yes.
something we saw as an outlier a long time ago, we've had to open up our standard deviations before we even flag something as an outlier because they're like, no, that's real. I mean, it's really what we're paying. We've also seen that on the low end. We've seen, I was with Culpepper back in 2008, 2009. We saw negative base salary increase budgets for companies, right? They were giving pay decreases. Our data had to shift with that. So we have to have sort of a pulse of what's going on to know that could be a legitimate, realistic thing. And this what's expanding right now will probably contract, and we'll we don't just say sorry, data can only go up. In markets where we know it's cooling, we will take in data that right now we might say question, but it can definitely go down month over month.
Yes. But often when practitioners are looking at their pay bands, I mean, they often prefer a ratchet up effect, thinking that, okay, this year we had to increase our pay bands up here. Next year, the market goes down a bit. They're not necessarily going to ratchet their or take their pay bands down. They're going to wait for the market to catch up over time, right? But so I think this is a really interesting conversation, but I would love to switch it over to just the international environment, because I know in the Culpepper survey itself and also in the budget survey, we're looking at multiple regions across the world, and they've all experienced different pressures. I think most of them are experiencing some elements of inflation, but some have been in hyperinflationary environments for years, and now it's just been exacerbated. So let's just talk about the different environments for our multinational companies out there.
So in our recent published results, obviously, we're seeing, I think, 90% of the globe is increasing their budgets for salary. And I can share some of those tables if you'd like. If you
Oh,
wanna
that'd be
look.
great. Sure.
Okay. Um, so this table, very high level, but obviously, this is our regional, sort of global regions trends. Obviously, from COVID, there was a little bit of a lull there as sort of the world shut down. But since
Between
that time,
2019 and 2020. Yeah.
Yep. And then from that time, we're just seeing a consistent increase in terms of average base salary increases. 90% of countries, I'm sorry, in 2023 right now are projecting to continue to raise from 2022 into 2023. So it's still continuing to go up as we speak, and that makes sense. Inflation is still sort of, is sort of high globally. And on average, the increases are about 25% higher across the globe. So we're seeing significant shifts.
So I just see some interesting things here, and I know you're sharing a graph, and for our listeners out there, that a graph shows the trend in average base salary increase year over year from time over time. And the biggest trend that we're seeing on this graph is as Stacey mentioned, between 2019 and 2020, there's often a decrease in base salaries or the rate of increase in base salaries. And so in North America, Asia, Oceania, Africa, European Union, all have a decrease during that between 2019 and 2020. And in Latin America, there's actually an increase and through the pandemic. So do we know what the rationale behind that was, Stacey?
I think that's just the hyperinflation. There's just a lot of volatility in Latin America. Even without Venezuela, you've just got a lot of volatility in that. We've got some people are having to give, increases monthly in some of those Latin American countries just because it's just insane. And this is minus Venezuela. We keep Venezuela out of, we take Venezuela data in, but we take it out of our Latin America averages because it's crazy.
Right. And so Venezuela and Argentina and countries like that have been in hyperinflationary environments for quite some time. And so what just as a quick sidebar here, what do you typically see your clients do when there's such huge inflationary pressures? How can they keep up with the market in those locations? What are you seeing?
Yeah, they're giving multiple increases in a year. You can't wait for annual. You're seeing them pay in different currencies. I think you see them try to get creative with, maybe they pay in a more stable currency. They try to pay in US dollars, or I don't remember who it was that was going to pay in Bitcoin, and that kind of fell apart. So I think they're doing anything to control some of the pressures on their own currency. But we don't see a lot of data from Venezuela, and because I think it's a lot of Western companies just don't want to touch it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's interesting. And I always tell my clients to try to stay away from paying in a different currency, because once you go there, it's difficult to come back from that. So that equation, and then of course you're baking in just the local economic and governmental forces, and when you and pay in a different currency, that can cause some significant problems from a company standpoint. So, but as we continue looking at this, I mean, it's obvious that there's just been huge increases in how countries across the globe are thinking about dealing with their budgets and moving into the next year.
Yes. Yeah. And again, we're always asking, what did you actually do at your last sort of published, rate? And then what are you projecting to do? And we are seeing consistently that what they said they were going to do for 2022 was lower than what they ended up having to do. 2020 projecteds right now are probably going to have to go higher when we actually get to the point where they say this is what we actually had to do. So I think right now we sort of are projecting something, but we know we're probably going to have to find more dollars, because unless something sort of breaks here, we're scraping to find more dollars even from what we projected we would need to do.
Yes, I find that consistently, and of course to our listeners out there, I would advise. I mean, if you see a 3% trend, like as in a budget trend, is what people are expecting to do, you should ask for more than that when you're going to finance, because it's always more than what they were expecting. And I think part of the reason, and we talked about this, Stacey, at the conference. I mean, part of the reason is that when people are participating in these surveys, they often don't know. It's like, oh, that's the reason why they want to do the survey. They're like, well, it's probably at or above or what we did last year. So they kind of stick on that certain trend. But then as the rubber meets the road and they get to those pay increases, and they start hearing back from managers, and they need to do something quite different, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you've been in I'll wear my US hat for a minute, but you could say this in any one of your countries, base pay increases have been pretty stable for the last 10 years, prior to COVID, right? So I think we all had the little joke. It was like, what do you, 3%. I mean, we didn't even really think about it. It was sort of a rote answer. And so I think we're now having to be more thoughtful about something that was pretty much just, inflation's really low. Talent pool is there, things are good, we're riding along, 3%. And that's just no more. The days of 3% are or whatever your sort of home country thing is. I think globally we're seeing that it's status quo is not there.
Right. And so, yeah, I often advise that. And then another thing is that when companies are looking at this information and we're looking at the average, we're looking at what the average company does. And therefore, if you consider yourself an average company, that's great. That might work for you. But there's some companies out there that are saying, well, hey, we are way above average. I mean, we're trying to be at the 75th percentile. And so we have to realize that there's a range of how companies are looking at their pay budgets. And it's not, when it's 3%, there's a lot of companies out there that are doing 4, 5, 6, 7. And that's just in the merit alone category.
Right, we're seeing, and so in our full results, in our full document of results, we're seeing actually small companies are paying more than large companies. So this US 4.11, and these are all average across sort of all company flavors here, but we break it down by locations, and we break it down by industry, and we break it down by company size, public, private, you name it. And we're actually seeing the small companies giving larger base pay increases. Maybe they don't have as many tools to give. They don't have maybe long-term cash, or they don't have some of these other options. So, and they can't really stand to lose anybody. Their bench strength is not there. So they've got to do whatever they can to keep that one or two, key software developers they have, or people they have. So we saw some inverse trend. You'd think the larger companies, but the smaller companies are having to dig pretty deep.
Yes.
We're also seeing more significant shifts in performance-based or like one-level promotions. You're seeing a one-level promotion from individual contributor to individual contributor is bumped up between 1% and 2% right now than what we normally saw. So you're seeing bigger one-level increases. You're seeing bigger, discretionary bonuses, all of that, just sort of across the board.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to just back up here, because we are talking about pay on a global scale here. We were talking about the different pressures from different regions of the world. And we do have a question that just came up. So what recommendations do you have when organizations recruit for regional or global roles, but utilize local salary scales, which primarily encompass salary benchmarking for at the company level or country level positions? And so I guess, I know that globalization, or due to the remote work boom, a lot of companies are hiring from different regions of the country, and then also outside the country. So when you look at this question, Stacey, what's your first reaction?
Well, I guess, where are they housed, right? So if this is some of the jobs on our survey side, we ask, what is the scope of the role? Is it a regional role? Is it a country level role? Is it a global role? Some of it's built into some of our codes, and some of it is something we ask on the data submission. In terms of the SBS, we don't ask that question. I guess it would come down to me on the other side, if I'm wearing my other survey hat, would be, how does that change the scope of the role? So if we're talking, I don't know what role we're talking, a sales executive that has Western US and they can live anywhere in the US versus, you've got APAC or you've got EMEA responsibilities. I do think, obviously, in certain roles, the larger region you have responsibility for, the scope of the role increases, and thus pay should probably increase. But that's sort of a tough thing to say, because sometimes a regional role is larger than a global role, depending on the company size, depending on the role, those types of things. Not in all roles does where you live or the geography matter. Usually the higher you get in an organization, the less location matters and more the scope of the role and size matters. So I would argue that once you get higher in the organization, that if you have a larger scope, your pay is going to go up.
Yeah. So one thing that I'm seeing is, especially with this remote work boom, smaller companies are starting to hire, one or two or three people from different parts of the globe, and places where they're not aware or they're not familiar with what the local pay pressures are in those areas. And so as a shortcut, they're saying, oh, we're just hiring one. We're just going to hire them at the same rate as we do here in San Francisco or whatever. And then and of course, they can be way, 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 way above the local market rate in that area. And so in a sense, they're paying more than what they need to in that area. But some people are saying, well, they're doing the same work, so why should we pay them less? And there's a whole nother podcast we can do on that itself.
Going to a currency converter and trying to figure out what to do, and not taking into account some pay parity and other issues. And just globally, we have a client right now that's out of San Fran, but they don't even have brick and mortar offices. They've got people all around the US, but she's like, we've got an employee that wants to live and work in Bali. I mean, everybody wants to, why not, right? But I'm like, are you sure you want to touch that? You know what I mean? Like, oh, they have good internet there and they have that. I'm like, okay, but legally and tax implications for your organization, what do you have to do to actually do business there? How do you pay this person? What about benefits? I mean, I think there's the touchy-feely side right now. If you can work from anywhere, go and live on the beach. And there's another one that a company has to sort of control for. Listen, we don't have a presence there. We don't have the license to do business there. We don't have boots on the ground there. We can't just allow the earth in general is not our labor market right now. We still have to put some constraints around that because of our business. Just the very few super large businesses can do that, right? So some of those asks, I think, are a little crazy right now, but we have companies literally trying to find a way to make that happen for people. And there could probably down the road be some ramifications around governments wanting to know who's working in their country and who's paying taxes and who's, it's a bigger question than that.
Right. Absolutely. But in the context of this question, I think that it's really critical for those that are paying in different markets to look at the local, cost of labor in that market and not just pay the U.S. rate. You can be very disruptive in those markets. But we're seeing, I'm seeing a ton of that, and that's happening in Africa, because Africa, there's very little pay data and people don't know how to pay there, and they're just like throwing money over the fence, and it's really disrupting the market over there.
No, we only take data in the home currency for the country that it comes from. We don't do any sort of conversions on that. We don't allow you to say, oh, they live here, but they make USD or whatever. And our data only comes out by country from that country. So don't ever run a US and then just do some sort of a conversion on it. Run your home country market data. Absolutely.
Right. So another thing that I'd love to hear your perspective on, Stacey, is that with the remote work boom, we saw some disruptions in the survey data during the pandemic, as it seemed that there was those people that were very high paid in San Francisco were starting to move across the country into different locations for different reasons, right? And then also in another piece that we heard just in this last the pay equity conference is that there's a greater desire to start paying closer to national rates than doing geographic differences to make it easier to comply with a lot of regulations. So let's just start there, because I know that Culpepper is a market leader in looking at different geographic pay zones and making that easy for practitioners out there that are using their information. What is your perspective of where geographic market pay, where is it heading?
So we've had to kind of change the way we ask that question as well, because for years it was, where is this person working? Well, that question was, the brick and mortar location in which they go every day. That's obviously changed. And now it's just sort of, where are they? Where do they sit on a daily basis? And this is the pay they earn. I think what's going to happen, so we have 5 pay zones, and we have that globally in different regions, but it's highest cost of labor to lowest cost of labor within that country. I think we're going to see them collapse. Not all the way down, but I think we're going to see them not be as distinct. We've all read about, it costs as much to buy a house right now in Boise, Idaho, or Salt Lake City, or some of these areas where people were saying, I don't need to live in the Bay Area, but now everybody went there. I can get this house for this much, and I can, wow, are you serious? And so they're driving everything up there. So we're seeing second tier, mid-tier markets going up a pay zone. Just simply because of that exodus of high-paying talent. And I do think people in those locations are now having to pay the same rates as somebody. So this going to a national rate, I kind of understand, like, we just paid this. We pay X for a software developer. I don't care if you live in, Boise or Lincoln or San Francisco. I don't think that's realistic. I do think there's still cost of living and cost of labor pressures in markets, housing, food, gas, that are going to require, even if you start at a national level, some geographic differentials on it's just I just think there's still too many markets that cost a lot more than others, but I do think they're going to start to sort of
narrow over time.
Yeah,
because let's just look at it. I mean, right now, the geographic pay differences just in the United States are to, there are like 40%. Just in areas. Just San Francisco compared to the national has been around 20%. So that's huge. And so if you're moving from a geographic pay practice to a national practice, that's going to impact tons of people in your workforce.
The person living in Lincoln, Nebraska is going to be really happy about a national structure. Your people in San Francisco are not. And
yeah,
so,
if you actually pay the national rate, but if there's just saying, oh well, let's just do it off the highest rate. Well, that's massive costs, right? Massive costs.
Yeah, that's where I'm just not sure. I think national is good in theory because it is such a living, breathing, moving number right now. But I think, again, you're always going to have one group that's undervalued in that scenario and some that are overvalued in that scenario.
Right. Okay, so what are the other things that you've learned in the Culpepper budget survey that came out?
Well, a lot of this we've talked about already, and for those that can see, this, we've already said, again, the days of we give 3%, we give 2.8%. I just chose North America here as an example to show for so long, everything was so consistent until we kind of started hitting, this is just sort of an iteration of that table that I showed, but we're starting to see things really move in a way that we haven't seen in a decade. So be prepared and be ready for these moves and knowing that they're still moving.
And one other thing I just want to talk about. Actually, let's just dive into the inflationary slide that you had, and I'll come back to this. Go ahead, Stacey.
Another one is freezes. So back in 2020, we saw 24% of companies saying, we don't know what's going to happen with COVID. We're shut down right now. Our supply chain is dried up. Our business is down 30%, whatever. So we saw a lot of people just holding tight on any sort of increases. Obviously, that has become very quickly almost nil. The change from COVID hitting to now in terms of any company saying we're not giving them, I think is unheard of. So I'm a little surprised by this, but the impact of timing, 10% of companies are accelerating their increases and saying we're going to give them either twice this year, we're going to move them up, we're going to give them multiple times. I kind of thought that number would be a little bit higher. 76% are still saying we're going to give bigger increases. right? Our 46% of our respondents said we're still going to give moderately to significantly higher increases than we did last year, but we're still only going to do it on our normal cycle.
Yeah.
Right.
So so just to talk a little bit about that, I wasn't surprised when I saw in your survey that a lot of companies were choosing not to do anything immediately due to the inflationary pressures. I thought that was, I kind of understood that in a bit. And because the majority of companies out there pay towards the cost of labor and not the cost of living.
Right.
And so those companies that pay the cost of labor, they know that persistent inflation is going to be built into those labor numbers. And it's just a matter of time before that happens. And so to avoid overcompensating for the impact of inflation, it's often prudent to wait for those numbers to actually come out in these professional surveys so that you don't overstep. So I thought that was good to see that there were some people that or a lot of practitioners out there that are waiting to see of how that actually gets baked into the cost of labor.
Right. And I think you and I have talked about it. It's so funny because from the time we started a COVID pulse survey through these last iterations, we've got a lot of people that are like, I wish you had a radio button on my answers for TBD. TBD. Yeah. Like, well,
right.
That's not a very good survey. If we say 90% of people say TBD, here's our results, right? So, but everybody was waiting to see what everybody else did. Everybody was waiting to see what happened with housing, what happened with, are we all going to go back to the office? Are we not? So we're in a TBD world in comp right now. And I hate to say that because that doesn't help us get our jobs done. But we have so many people saying, I don't know. I can't answer this until I see your results. I'm like, well, I need to get somebody to answer it so that we can start somewhere and have a conversation, right? But it was very difficult for people to not just scratch their head on the results. So,
right.
You know,
but then the next thing that I thought was really good in the survey is on your next slide, I believe, is where you're showing, okay, so we know that there's inflationary pressures and we want to be careful with our fixed pay costs because especially right now, you know, inflation is huge. The market is cooling a bit. If we spend too much, we can actually hurt the company. So what do we do in situations where we don't want to inflame our fixed pay budget? And so what did you find here with the results, Stacey?
So the question here was, what outside of base pay sort of are you looking to use as options, right? And we are seeing a bit of an uptick from previous versions of the survey in some of the variable one-time pay, right? If this is a temporary situation, I don't want to put permanent money year over year toward this if the market's going to cool or things are going to shift. So we're seeing an uptick specifically in the sign-on and hiring stuff, the referral bonuses and the retention stay bonuses for sure. Now, these are the results that showed over 20% of people saying, yes, we're using this particular option. We also saw some other long-term cash stuff in the 19-18%. Anything that could help, you know, with some retention, some other equity pieces and longer-term pieces. And then we're seeing people say, we're letting people just continue to work remotely. We're going to offer better, you know, gym memberships, gas cards. I mean, it's really getting kind of creative right now, but these are the big heavy hitters. And I think a lot of this is, again, this is a cost control metric to say, I can offer you this one time and maybe next year again, but I can't guarantee it year over year for the life of your employment here at this point. I don't know that the market or our internal controls are going to allow for that.
Yeah, but one thing that I was really quite inspired by this data because it's rare we see that the market as a whole moves so smartly in handling situations with pay pressures going up so extreme. We see this increased use of getting cash in people's hands as soon as possible through very smart measures such as these spot bonuses, retention bonuses, and then also, I mean, just to continue to offer the benefit of working remotely, staying at home, not having to pay for that commute costs, being more effective with our costs overall in time. I thought this was a great outcome of seeing how companies are really using their budgets wisely.
Agree. You know, we
So,
see a lot of companies lowering their footprint from brick and mortar offices right now. And they're putting that money back in the hands of their employers, saying we're paying a lot less on leases if we have shared office spaces and we do some of these other things because the office is sitting empty. We're seeing a lot of clients start to do that and wonder how they're going to do sort of reconfigure an office where everybody used to have their own private space to a more shareable situation, but that saves you, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars every month.
right. Well, I know we've talked about a lot of things here, Stacey. Is there any, we're coming towards our last 10 minutes. And so is there any final thoughts or any pieces that you want to lead with?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about a lot of this, but I feel bad for everybody that's a comp person right now out in the world. You and I just, you know, talk about what we see, but other people have to actually make these decisions and go out and actually have employees that are going to be affected by the decisions they're making on a daily basis. So I definitely feel for those in our field right now. You know, just to touch back on, 2/3 of the companies in our survey said we match the market. That's our base pay philosophy. But what is market? That's the big question right now. And for how long? If I can find the right number today, which again, does that exist? What is it going to be next week? What's it going to be next year? What's it going to be when I reset again? So matching the market is hard when the market is a moving thing. And finding what that looks like in various roles and in various markets. What is all of what's going on right now going to do to our pay fairness and pay compression issues? I think we touched on that. Remote versus in office, again, that's a big one. Is this temporary? Is this permanent? What does your leadership kind of want to do with that? Are you willing to be sort of, let's just rip the Band-Aid off and get rid of this office, or no? I want everybody back in the office every day. That's still my goal. But you always see a correlation between inflation and these pay raises, but obviously we're not meeting inflation with even in the 4% and 5% increases, and inflation is up in that 8%. We're not covering it in base pay increases right now. So and I read a study just yesterday from Grant Thornton that said 40% of employees are expecting greater than 6% increases at the end of the year or in first quarter of 2023. 31% expecting greater than 8%, and 21% expecting greater than 10%. That's not, at least from an average perspective, not what we're seeing. So how is that going to happen? You know, how is that going to affect employees when they say, but inflation's this? I read that I should be getting this raise this year. And you know, if inflation's 8%, if I get 5%, that's actually like a pay decrease. And so how are we going to communicate with our employees when these numbers come out and say, guys, we can afford to give 4 or 5s, but we can't give 10% increases this year. The organization can't sustain itself with that year-over-year increase. And what do we do instead? And how do we communicate that to our employees and make it feel like they we understand the pain points that they're feeling right now, especially those hourly folks. Mm-hmm. And then where do we get really creative with a bucket of money that in the past we've been able to just sort of apply to make sure that we are keeping our top talent? Do we have a bucket of A talent, B talent, C talent that we can say, you know what, we've got some top performers in hot jobs. I've got to be willing to give them those increases because they're getting offers and they're getting hit up on LinkedIn every day for offers a lot higher than this. So we are seeing, you know, increases in what we're willing to give high performers versus low performers. Who's the talent we really can't lose, either in, you know, critical roles? Where's our flight risks? Where's our performers? And where can we find some more for them?
Right. Well, thank you so much, Stacey, for sharing your wisdom here. This has been a great conversation and with great information and so forth. But I know our listeners out there are asking themselves, you know, how can I learn more? How do I purchase the Culpepper budget survey? How do I learn more about Culpepper's services and so forth? So can you kind of break that down for us?
Yeah, I mean, culpepper.com, pretty easy. But again, you don't have to be a subscriber to Culpepper to be part of our SBS, our salary budget survey. So keep that in mind. It's closed right now. If you want to buy our August results, you can. And you can just call on us for that. Otherwise, when it opens back up again, I don't know exactly when yet, fall. You participate and then you get the preliminary results as they come out, as well as the final results once they're published. In terms of the survey side of the business, we sell 1-year licenses to our data. We're global. And and we can answer all the questions anybody has specific to their organization if they call us.
Great. And what markets does Culpepper focus on?
We're heavy in tech, IT. We have a life sciences survey. We have a healthcare administration survey, sort of the non-patient facing healthcare jobs, and then just your general. We're going to have all of your general G&A, finance, admin, operations jobs as well.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Stacey, for joining us. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I think that we've all learned a lot out of this. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Good to see you.
All right. See everybody else on the next Rewards Mastermind next month. We broadcast each month. So join us next time here in the Rewards Mastermind. Thank you, everyone.